Hello and welcome back to A Study in Purple by the WECB under surround sound of Emerson College.
Hello. Oh my god.
That was loud.
Yeah, that was very loud.
It's okay. Just bring her down a little. But yeah. This episode is about Charles Manson.
Yeah. You know, they say that family's blood, but I don't think that's what they mean by it.
But no, you wrote that and I thought it was so funny.
Yeah, thank you.
Because that's why I was like, we should name this episode Family, because of literally they were family.
Yeah, it was called The Family though, right?
Yeah, like the actual cult itself is called The Family, which I thought was funny, and like that should be definitely used. But yeah, as always, we got a content warning.
So before we dive in, just a heads up. Although we're not going to dive into like gruesome details and all that stuff, this is still a crime show, and we talk about crimes and blood and abuse and violence and murder and all of that wonderful stuff. And we know this may be triggering for some listeners, and if you are not up for this, please take this moment to leave. Thank you very much.
Take care of yourself. We're not trying to cause any more trauma. And we just want to make sure that like all our listeners are
and
here
also,
because you can be and are able to be. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, sorry. And if you feel like later on you're up for listening to our episodes, you can find some of them on YouTube. So.
Wow. If you can't find it, I think it's linked on our Instagram bio.
It is,
So if you know our Instagram.
Yeah. So if you missed it because you didn't feel up for it tonight, go to our YouTube and it will be uploaded in the next couple of days.
Is it weird to tell people if they missed it when they wouldn't be listening to it right now that they missed it?
Well, I'm saying to people who want to click off. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying if you want to leave right now, you can come back later and listen to it on your own time, and you can pause it. Right now, you can't pause us. We're unstoppable.
We are live. Anyway, so I guess we'll get right into it. So, some bathroom facts. If you don't know who Charles Manson is, Charles Miles. I said Miles. It's fine. Was born November 12th, 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio. I know, I put a little note next to it that says yucky, but it's funny because my boyfriend's a Scorpio.
My brother's a Scorpio.
So,
but they are kind of yucky. No offense to Scorpios, but some of you guys are.
Some of you guys are a little yucky. That's not the main point though. But because of Manson's unhappy childhood that he had, for the first few weeks of his life, he was known as No Name Maddox, which is like, wow, they really cared so much about him, and like they didn't like. They're so mean children. He was born to a 16-year-old mother of Kathleen, and that didn't know what to do with him, and like the father was like gone and out of the picture. It was gone and out of the picture because of just not being like a good representation of what a father should be, and as well as just knocking up his
I think
mom.
I think he dipped when he heard that she was pregnant.
He was like,
And he was also 25. He was like almost a decade older than her.
Yes.
Crazy.
Which I wonder if this could have been like another thing out of that result, and like she didn't want to, but whatever. And like he wasn't like had bigger like father influences in his life to be able to like teach him right around, like not like a good like parenting, because his mother didn't really want him and his dad didn't want him. So I feel like that leaves a lot of trauma for a kid to not feel wanted in that respect. His mother was a lot of the times drunk, not really taking care of him, and like often left Charles to like do his own thing and not really watching over him and, you know, being a parent, because I feel like she didn't know what to do. She had him young, and just felt like drinking her troubles away was the answer. It's very much not, but hey,
Yeah.
And then she sold him to a waitress for a pitcher of beer.
Yeah.
Which I find funny. But
Charles says that he has a memory of her, or had a memory of her. Like the two of them went to the restaurant, and the waitress came up and she was like, "Can I buy that baby?" And his mom was like, "Yeah, if you give me a pitcher of beer." And the waitress brought the pitcher of beer, and the mom just like drank it and walked out of the restaurant. And that's it.
I mean,
just left him there.
You can really tell how much she cared about Charles, truly. And like just leaving it to the waitress, like she either must have been really drunk, or she really just like didn't want to get rid of him really fast.
Well, she left him for a while afterwards.
Yes.
Because his uncle tracked him down 4 days later and took him home. And then he and his mom were both arrested, and Charles went to live with his grandparents.
Which is like, wow, great start to your life, Charles, truly. But since both his uncle and mother were imprisoned, living with his grandparents was a little bit better. It was probably where he had the most stable life between the age of 6 and 8. Because up to that point, like, those developmental years, that was all messed up. And his grandparents made it a little bit better. And then at 9, he was sent to reform school for stealing. Because of, I'm guessing the grandparents didn't want to deal with him as much because he was getting into a lot of trouble as it is. And they are, of course, older, and they don't know how to deal with that anymore. They already raised 2 children, at least, so they were kind of done. They were, like, sent out, but, like, it just feels like nobody wanted Charles. He was always being pushed around. Like, nobody wanted to deal with him. Nobody took him on, and he's always was going to struggle with that. I don't know if you had something to say. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to continue talking about the grandparents. Apparently, his grandparents thought that he was, like, very soft and, you know, like, air quotes. And his grandpa made him wear a dress to the first day of school because he was like, "Oh, you're so girly." And so his grandpa was really, like, trying to, like, beat
the man
discipline. Yeah, like, discipline into him.
But like, I'm guessing because wearing a dress to school, and especially for the time, it wasn't very normal, and the kids made fun of him for it because they were like, like, Charles is dressed as a girl, and like he wasn't having enough trouble being named No Name Maddox.
This was like mid-30s, so I guess no, like 40s.
But like even so, then they weren't very accepting of men wearing dresses at the time, as they probably are now. So it led to Charles probably also developing trauma from that, and why the grandparents sent him to reform schools, kind of buff him up and beat the man into him, I guess, to say that. But then at 15, he, like, an assessment showed that he was illiterate, violent, and aggressive, but he had, like, a natural incline towards music that he was very much, like, calmed by, in a way.
Music man.
He's a music man. Which we'll get into a little bit more later, what music in particular. But basically just doing this test showed that, like, probably because of a lot of his childhood, he had terrible role models, like his mom and uncle, that would be, like, criminals, and then eventually started stealing at a young age, and then, of course, adapted that further, and, had more violent tendencies. And then, of course, as he got older, he was like, yeah, let's, it's definitely, we should have marriage and, like, kids.
Who was gonna stop him?
Like, no one, but, like, I would think the spouses would be like, something's off, but I guess not yet. So he had 2 official spouses, and out of those spouses, he had 3 kids. His first child was named Charles Manson Jr. I don't see the nepotism in that. Like, I don't see the narcissism. That's like very normal, very wow. And eventually, after those marriages and the kids, like, he moved to California to make it in the music business, as we all love to do.
Yeah.
But it's
Oh, I was just gonna say that Charles like my favorite name, and I was always like I don't want kids, but then if I ever did have a kid, I would name it Charles. And now I'm reconsidering.
Good on ya. Like, maybe... I don't know. Like, maybe Edward's nice. Who knows?
Edward Tulane.
Okay, not that show. And then eventually, Charles moved to California to make it in the music, but instead accidentally began building a cult of girls from troubled backgrounds and basically persuading them to do his bidding and kind of like what he wanted and influencing them because of not kind of having like people to go to be like, hey, is this okay? And like having parental figures or guardians anyway, so they kind of fell into his trap. They started a cult. Anyway,
this was also at the time of like it was the 60s, so it was
very like experimental time. Very much like, okay, let's smoke and just like try everything we can because who's gonna stop you?
Yeah, no, it was a time of change. It was all the baby boomers who were born after like the silent generation. They were like happy. They were being hippies. They were protesting their rights. You know, good times. Good times.
I feel like that also came with some bedtimes once we reach into more the 70s, but but they would be smoking, have like orgies, basically like a lot of fun. In short, lamest terms. And then Charles' dreams of being a music career kind of failed when people found out that he was having a child.
Yeah, he was like
having children, like sex, like under his direction. Sorry, I worded that right. Having sex.
I think he was like making people.
He was having children have sex under his direction, and like he and his family were like kicked out of Hollywood, which is like crazy that you would do this with like your family, like just sit there. Being like, oh yeah, like in the background. Like I know they weren't like there in the actual like when this is happening, but like if you're having like all these orgies and then you come home and be like, hi honey, like.
Well, I think didn't they live together like communally because they were. I read that they lived at someone's house. It was this. Oh, it was one of the Beach Boys singers.
Yes. I forget which one.
He was driving. Yeah, I don't know which one, but he was driving and he picked up 2 hitchhikers and they ended up being from the family, and then they ended up like going back home with him, and then he left for a whole day to do something, and when he came back there was like a raging party and Manson was there, and the girls were like, oh, this is the divine guy we were telling you about, and so then Manson and the whole family, which his cult was called, lived at the Beach Boys house.
Yes.
They just lived there, and then they were like, when they were kicked out of Hollywood, they were kicked out of the house, and they moved to like a stable or something, and they just lived kind of like hippies, you know, like just lounging around and like, I don't know, intense.
But like imagine just like he's also making an unstable childhood for like his kids with all that moving around and also promoting this like parental stuff. Like it's okay to like do all these things.
I don't think there's parental stuff going on anywhere.
Like
nowhere in sight.
I'm sorry for like thinking that maybe, you know, there should be parents here. Like that's wild. My bad.
No, everyone's on their own.
Apparently, especially these kids. But Charles was also called like a racist, and like he eventually was. Well, he is a cult leader and also a killer from making people do his bidding and kill, which we'll get into. But like specifically a cult leader of the family, what the name of this episode is, which was a group that listened and thought of Manson as like a dominant being and like this like all powerful, like think like God in that sense, and is kind of very like worshiping him, like thinking that he's like all knowing, and just like he was like God speaking to him, to like tell these people like, oh, like this is what you should do. Oh, like this is the prophecy from God. Like this is what he's telling me for you guys to do, what we should do to make sure we go to heaven and make sure that we like fulfill everything and make sure that we're really speaking to the people itself in that way, and just using psychology to persuade people to follow him and tell him kind of like what they want to hear in a way. So it'd be like, yes, like God has spoken to me last night in my sleep, and he has told me that we must kill people.
It's crazy that so many people fell for this. Like, imagine, I mean, I guess you can't imagine because we're not living in the cult.
No, but it's not even, like, it's usually the parents that take their children into this and they live for so many years, and then their kids are growing up with this cult itself, and kind of some kind of still have cults now because of just generations. There's only, that's all you know, and you don't want to leave that because people don't like change, and they like that comfort of knowing this, and why they decided to believe Manson, and just like because they're like, oh yes, our all-powerful God is speaking to us through him. Like, he's a prophecy, because it was always deemed that they would come one day, and of course they don't have technology or any like type of like research to easily be like, nah, this is not facts, man. And so they would just start believing to believe, so that way they can have this ulterior power, so that way they can have this belief that like, oh yes, like God has come back for us to save us from like this time type of thing. And I feel like what a lot of Manson was kind of like telling them and what to believe and what to go off of. And he would bring, like, the girls brought in like most of the money, since like the girls didn't work.
The guys didn't work.
You wrote here, girls.
I miswrote.
Since the guys didn't work, since in this cult it was very much like one-sided, but like men stayed home and then the women worked. It was very modern.
It's also a very specific kind of work.
Never mind. We won't get into that one, but you know what we're hinting at. If you don't know, well, you're precious.
Hollie's winking.
Why are you lying to the viewers? So the song that we were talking about before, he was very much obsessed with the Beatles. Sorry, Beach Boys, I know they were living in your house, but like whatever. Especially the song Helter Skelter. Okay. Especially the song Helter Skelter. If you don't know it, look it up on YouTube. We don't got the time. We got stuff to do right now. Claiming that Manson believed it was claiming to be envisioned of a war between people that are white and people that are black, and that the blacks would eventually win, and that Charles needed to lead them.
Yeah.
Yes, this very white man needed to lead.
No, because he was very inherently racist, so he was like, the black people are going to win.
But they can't do it without us white people.
Yeah, but I'm going to lead them because they need a white guy to lead them.
Totally. That's exactly how it works.
Yeah.
Like, totally, like, let's forget about Martin Luther King and, like, Malcolm X. Like, let's get rid of them. Right? No. Like, what? Anyway.
I know, it's also at the same time. Like, my guy. What?
He was like, nah. Let me take over real quick. Martin Luther King Jr.
They want me.
You're wrong. I'm okay. Bye. Nuh-uh. Rosa Parks, I know you, like, did a lot with the bus and, like, got arrested, but, like, come on. You really didn't do that much. Just kidding. No,
this is an impression of Charles.
Yes, I don't actually think that's fake. Please. His plan was to release an album based like on this, and he wanted to release an album
to like
album. Sorry.
Album.
Album.
He wanted to release an album that kind of like with songs that were more clear, like expanding on his perceived message of Helter Skelter and this prophesized war. And so he was like, my first plan, we release album. And then they all started working towards that.
An album be great because album people will listen to album and then they will be able to figure out from the album that we are the prophecy, that I am the prophecy, and this is what's gonna happen, and we are going to help Black people.
And from the album, they'll be able to figure out that we are the problem.
What? That's crazy. White people being the problem? Never.
This guy specifically is the problem.
Well, yeah. Let's like not talk about so many other white people that also have caused problems. I don't think we need to mention them. We all know. But then having the people commit murders to his whim and having them do his dirty work for what he in his little messed up mind was like, yes, this is what we're gonna murder people because yay. And like he was psychotic. Yeah. And just making people just feel like, okay, go, bye, have fun. Yeah.
So step 1, release music album.
Step 2.
That failed. Step 2, murder people. That's logical. Yeah. I mean, that's always what I think about. Like, step 1, get a London fog. Step 2, that failed. Murder people. Obviously.
Because, if Tantes runs out of London fog ever, hopefully not, because that would be a terrible day in the Nina world. And also in the Hollie world, since I have to live with her. Then, like, we would all be dead. So always make sure to stock up on London fog, guys. So if you happen to see a wild Nina running the streets killing people, you just throw London fog at her. Okay, great.
I feel like that would work. Like if I ever lost my mind, or like if I got dementia or something, and you brought London fog to me, I would be like, yes.
My health is so much better now. But Plan A, kind of failed with the whole album thing. So. The murder plan B. It wasn't even plan Z. It probably was like plan AA. Plan A, subsection A.
Alcoholics Anonymous.
Probably needed to go, especially for his mom. But anyway. But let's get into the crime, because we talked so much about this background already.
Yeah. So Manson was obsessed with the idea of a war, like a race war, between Black people and white people in America. And he told people that the Beatles were sending him messages through his songs, specifically the White Album, because it contained hidden messages, and specifically songs like Helter Skelter, Revolution 1, and Blackbird. And everything was like kind of foreshadowing that war. And in the war where Black Americans would overthrow white people, and Manson, would lead them, because obviously.
I think, so last semester I took American pop history, which went over, like, music, and, like, last day we talked about Helter Skelter. That was absolutely incorrect what Manson was talking about. That was, like, it was definitely about war, but it was more like the government, like, sending everybody to war during this time, not, like, a war between white people and Black people. Like, it wasn't specifically that. It was just more, like, if I remember correctly, it was just more about just war at the time, and how, like, we send all these, like, young men into, like, battle, and we never know if, like, they'll, like, come back. And, like, the government doing that to them.
I read, like, several sources that were talking about how he thought there was going to be a war between people in America, because everybody's going to war in other countries. Like, we had the Vietnam War, and we had the, we had civil rights, we had women's rights, we had the hippie movement, and all of that stuff, and he thought that it was just, like, society was coming to an end, and it was the end of the world. And
clearly not.
And people no way. And people were going to fight each other. And there was going to be, like, a race war. That's what I read. But you may be right.
No, I think the actual song that the Beatles intended to do,
I see what you're saying.
like the actual thing, like not what Manson thought, because Manson was weird and like he misinterpreted what the Beatles was saying.
Nah, he's a nice guy.
But I believe Helter Skelter, Helter Skelter was mostly just about war in general and sending these young men into war when they're not even old enough to like drink at the time. and kind of the ethics behind that, and kind of like, oh, it feels like the government is sending them into a losing battle in some ways. And I feel like a lot of the albums, like Revolution 1 was a little bit about that, and like I think Blackbird kind of something a little different, but
well, that would make sense, because the Beatles were, I mean, although they are English, they were really, really popular in America, and like the hippie movement was inspired partially by them.
Yes.
And people were like really following their songs, not to this extent, but
they were very peace and like love and not having this war at all. And kind of why they wrote songs like that, to kind of fight back. Like it was very like against the patriarchy type vibe. And definitely not a race war.
Yeah. No, Beatles are great. Check them out. They are awesome.
Have you never heard of the Beatles before? Well, have I got a treat for you.
Actually, like, I don't know. I feel like some people know of the Beatles but don't know their songs. Because that was me. I always thought that I was like, oh, the Beatles? That's pretentious people like this music. And then I learned about the 60s, and I was like, oh, wow.
The Beatles? Like the bug? Beatles like the bug.
Yeah.
Actually. Sorry, continue.
So Manson thought that there was going to be, like, a whole war, and they're going to elect him to lead people afterwards. I don't know why he thought that, but, like, okay.
Yeah, that would be the person that I thought to lead the war.
Yeah, honestly.
Sure.
That was my first choice, too. You know, it's like housing applications, and you have to pick several places where you want to live, and you just put Manson on. First choice, second choice, third choice.
Manson Mansion. Oh my god. Imagine saying that 10 times faster.
No.
Manson Mansion.
Yeah, so, and he thought that, I think, like, he thought that his followers specifically would hide out in the desert to escape the chaos. And then after the war, they would emerge out of the desert, and like, I don't know, they would be the rulers of the new world. I don't. This sounds like a lot of crap to me, but it's okay. And when Manson realized that his prophecy wasn't happening as quick as he wanted it to, he decided that he is going to trigger it himself. And he decided to do this by taking matters into his own hands and murdering a couple of people and making it look like Black Panther attacks. I think that's what it was. Yeah, Black Panthers. They kind of like left false clues around the murder scenes that were kind of like supposed to lead back to Black Panthers, and, you know, and make it like trigger the war. But that didn't happen, obviously.
I'm looking up about Helter Skelter, because I was like, am I wrong? Because I felt wrong.
Yeah.
So Helter Skelter is the name of an amusement park in United Kingdom. And so that's why they, like, in the song it says like going down and like blah blah blah. I'm not gonna sing for you. But I think they mostly wrote about a roller coaster, and Manson was like, war!
Well, no, I think it was about the war, but it was like roller coaster inspired. Like, I think it was an analogy.
The up and down of the war, because it was a lot of like, okay, like America like telling us one thing, and then another like place would be telling us another thing, and they didn't know what to believe, because in America they were like, oh yeah, like all is great, like your family is doing fine that are out there fighting for our country. Very much not.
Yeah. So that...
Sorry, I interrupted.
No, you're good. That's a good fact.
Fun facts with Hollie.
So he decided to trigger the war himself, and he decided to do this by, like, he was trying to get revenge on this music producer who, like, kind of, like, didn't let him produce his awesome music into an album. Named Terry Melcher. I didn't really figure out what happened with Terry Melcher exactly, but he thought that Melcher lived at the house where he sent his first, like, murderers to, and he ordered them to go there and destroy everyone in the house and make it, like, as gruesome as possible and leave clues of the Black Panthers being there. But it turned out that this house no longer belonged to Terry Melcher, and it actually belonged to Roman Polanski. Polanski.
Yeah.
Yes.
Polanski. It's like Poland, but the ski at
Polanski.
the end.
Polanski.
Which was a famous film director at the time.
Yeah, he was a famous film director, and he lived there with his wife, Sharon Tate.
His wife at the time. He had a few wives. They were only married for a year when this happened.
Yeah. And she was beautiful. She was an actress, and she was compared to, I read somewhere that she was compared to Marilyn Monroe.
Wow.
And, like, yeah, she was 8 months pregnant or something, 8.5 months. And, her husband, Roman, wasn't home at the time. He was away, like, filming something, I think, because he was a film director.
Whoa.
And the group that Manson sent to kill Terry entered the house, and basically, like, they cut the telephone wire. They saw some guy pulling in, and they killed him. And then they killed everyone inside the house, and there was, like, some gruesome details where they tied several people together, like, with a cord by their necks and stuff, and then they killed everyone in the house and, like, stabbed everyone.
Ew, yucky.
Yeah, and then they wrote the word pig in blood on the front door. And then they left.
And then they gone. They did an Irish goodbye.
Family out. No. And then basically this was on August 8th through 9th in 1969. So this was, like, the end of the the 60s. And so nothing happened. They left the house. And then the next day, Manson was like, now we need to go and kill these other people. And they planned the murder of the LaBiancas. I think it was called the Helter Skelter. It's called, like, the Helter Skelter mission. On August 9th, like, literally the next day.
They were like, oh, we're bored.
No, I don't think they were bored. I think it was a part of the plan, because they were trying to go around and, like...
This is what God wanted based on Charles Manson's orders.
Yes. This is what the Beatles wanted.
Sorry, my bad. The Beatles are God.
Yes. Yeah, so they... Like, the next night, they went to the mansion, and it was the home of Lino and Rosemary LaBiancas. And, like, basically they were there alone, and the gang entered. And Lino was there on a couch, and they asked him if anyone else is in the house, and he said that Rosemary's there. I don't know why he said that. Like, I feel like if a gang of people enters and they're like, you're being robbed, why would you tell them that someone else is in there? I don't know. Like, maybe he thought that he would be safer, he told them, but, like, I don't know. I feel like I wouldn't say that. Anyway, so he told them that Rosemary is in the house and she's in the bedroom sleeping. And they went and they woke her up, and they let her put a dress on top of her nightgown. And they led her out into the living room, and they tied them together. And they were just like, oh, you're being robbed, it's gonna be okay, and you won't be harmed. I think Manson also personally went to the house, and he was like, you guys are gonna be fine. We're just robbing you, it's gonna be great, like, you're gonna be fine, we won't hurt you. And then they killed them.
I feel like that's against what was initially being said.
Yeah. So they killed them, and then they, I think they also robbed them or something, and...
Well, while you're at it.
Yeah, while you're at it.
Might as well stay true to your word.
And, yeah, well, Manson wasn't part of the murders, but the followers murdered the both people, the LaBiancas, and it was, like, some gruesome stuff going on that we won't dive into. And then they wrote words on the wall, they wrote death to pigs, and on the fridge door they wrote Helter Skelter, but they misspelled it, spelling it Healter instead of
Helter Skelter
Lter. Like, they added the A in there. And yeah, and they wrote it in the victim's blood. So yeah, and that was the murders.
So fun. Definitely not.
Great.
Okay, so what happened to Manson? Because eventually they did find out that it was Charles Manson. Like, how can you keep that many people under wrap for, like, what happened?
Mm-hmm.
No. No.
Yeah.
But because of killing the famous, like, actor Sharon Tate, who, of course, we said was the wife of Roman Polanski, the bodies at Tate's house were found 12 hours later. So people were confused about why Hollywood elite would be murdered like that for no reason. Like, what intention? Like, she like did nothing wrong, and like in the people's eye, like what happened? Like, what would lead to do that? So they eventually kind of like find out that it's Manson and like his cult gang, mostly his cult gang, because he really didn't. He just sent them to do it. But it led to the investigation led to the arrest of Manson and 3 of his followers at least. I think there's more that eventually got arrested from that, but or they at least questioned or were just given less time or like parole or community service type thing for doing so, because it wasn't like they were being told to do so. It was more like an accomplice type thing.
I know that they were arrested for something else. It was like for vandalism or something in October. So this was like 2 months later. They were arrested for something else, and then they were like, wait a minute, do you know anything about these murders? Maybe you were also there. Do you want to talk about it? And one of them, I think it was Susan Atkins, gave away, she was like, oh yeah, this is either Leslie Van Houten or Susan Atkins, gave away the whole mission, and she was like, yeah, this is what happened, in exchange for some sort of like reduced sentence. Yeah.
Which is like 2 months, guys. Like, they really had like no sources otherwise. But then Manson was going around bragging about knocking off 5 people as well. So he didn't hump the case either. Like, he was bragging about like, yeah, killed them. Like, bro, this is not something to be proud of.
It wasn't more than 5 people. It was 5 people only in one house. It was 7 people.
Because of
them
of Shannon Tate.
So basically they were arrested in October 1969 for basically unrelated crimes. It was like stolen cars and vandalism and stuff like that. And eventually they were linked back to the Tate LaBianca's murders. There were confessions from Susan Atkins, and it says a Manson family member. Oh, yes. And then Manson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, it's a great last name, and Leslie Van Houten were all charged on 7 accounts of murder and conspiracy to commit murder. And there's another guy, his name was Tex Watson, who was tried separately. And basically, they did not behave well in court. They were, not listening. They were shouting. They were trying to attack people. They were, not listening to, they were not abiding the orders of the judge. They were, basically behaving poorly. And I read somewhere that they kept being, banned from the courtroom. The defendants kept being banned because they just weren't listening. Manson also, he had a lawyer, but he kept trying to represent himself. And the judge denied him that. He was like, no. Honey, no.
Are you sure? Speedy, are you sure about that? Because I feel like this won't go well for you if you do that.
No, I think he is his best lawyer. So Manson basically turned the whole trial into, a circus. He was using mind games. He was, trying to intimidate people. He carved an X into his forehead, which he later turned into a swastika. He glared at the jury. Yeah, he glared at the jury because trying to control them with his hypnotic stare. Imagine if you're sitting in on the jury for this case and the defendant is glaring at you and you're being told by the defense team that you should, forgive him. What? No. Thank you.
No, imagine these jury people, because, some of them are like, yeah, I was just a teacher yesterday. Today, I'm being glared at by this killer.
Today, I'm being mind-controlled by a guy with a swastika on his forehead.
People would not believe you.
Yeah. He threatened the judge and laughed during witness testimonies. And also, he tried to attack the judge by jumping over the table, and then he was restrained. Really,
as he should.
really put his best foot forward for this trial. He also had he has female female followers who people found him attractive and they wanted to marry him. Like even now people want to I don't know, it's confusing. Or I guess he died, but like before he died people wanted to marry him. I'm
okay.
Yeah. And they basically like had protests outside of the courthouse and they were chanting and like throwing things at people, and it was like a whole ordeal. Great. It was awesome.
Needless to say, I don't think that he got off with a warning.
Didn't the glaring help?
I like maybe a little. Like maybe he just didn't eat enough that day. Maybe he God didn't speak to him that night. Maybe he didn't listen to enough Helter Skelter beforehand to really rejuvenate his power.
Yeah, he should have been like, you know, he shows up to court and he starts playing Helter Skelter, just like Helter Skelter.
Which eventually led to him being on January 25th, 1971. Manson and his co-defendants were found guilty of all charges. Surprise, surprise, guys. What can you say? He was sentenced to death on March 29th, 1771, because of the
Abolition.
Is that really
Abolition?
okay?
That's a word. I think
it is, but I don't like abolition. Like it feels.
No, it's abolition.
Okay. Never mind. I'm learning
I
English
know that
today. I know that one. But after the abolition of like capital punishment, he was only sentenced to life in prison. So he did spend a lot of time in prison. Actually, not really, because it was like 7 years later that they were like, "Hey, do you want to go on parole?" Why, guys? Okay. We really think that he was so good in jail that he's like ready to be on the world.
7 years. Oh my god, I didn't realize that. 7 years later, they asked him to go on parole.
Yes.
No. Why? This guy was trying to. This guy was staring down a jury. No.
Like I don't think that we thought about this, guys.
Yeah.
Like this guy literally carved out a swastika on his forehead. How about we don't? And then
thankfully he declined. He was just like, no, thank you.
Thankfully, because he refused it and he declined it. Because they were asked also multiple times, and he also declined a lot of hearings as well.
Yeah.
For anything. So
no, thank you guys. I'm good.
Sorry, my powers are not up to date.
My stare hasn't been. It's a bit rusty. I don't know if I can do it again.
It's not really in it for me right now.
Yeah. So basically, this like the murders and the cult shocked America to the core, because it was like one of the most covered crimes in the 20th century. It's interesting because I haven't heard about it. Like I heard of Manson and I heard of Tate. Surprisingly, Sharon Tate. I've heard of her, but I haven't researched this and I don't know any details. Like prior to this, I didn't know anything. But yeah, this case really like shook everyone. It also changed the public perception of the hippie culture, and it like ended the 60s, like the decade of like hope and kind of like this, I don't know, flower children and all of that stuff.
Flower child.
Yeah, because and it went into like the uncertain and like more paranoid 70s. Because people like it really changed the perception of the hippies, because there was this guy with his cult who were living like hippies, and he was just like, he became like the symbol of pure evil, of the devil, and he one of the most infamous criminals in history, and people didn't want to like associate with them, like other hippies as well, because his family dressed like hippies and they lived in a commune, and they were kind of like lived by the same, not the same obviously, but like similar like philosophies as the hippies, because they were all about like anti-violence, like obviously not like that, but you know, they were like into this whole like anti-establishment and like establishment violence, and they were like free love and drugs and all of that. And the phrase hippie cult became really common at the time, and people were like in mainstream society, and people were just moving away from that. They were like, no thank you, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. They became really paranoid that like other groups like Manson's family could be living among the hippies, and it just like marked the transition from the idealism of the 60s to the paranoid 70s. Also, the trial was kind of like a precedent for how cult leaders could be held accountable for crimes they didn't physically commit, because Manson didn't physically kill anyone, but he was like, he did orchestrate all this stuff, and he did plan the murders, and so you can't try him as a murderer because he didn't technically touch anyone, but he was there and he was like doing all that stuff, so it really influenced like criminal law as well. So yeah, this case changed conspiracy laws, and basically established that you can be convicted of planning a murder, or like of murder without pulling the trigger. And these murders also inspired a lot of books, one of which Hollie keeps talking about, called Helter Skelter.
Oh my god, like the book or something? That's crazy.
Yeah, I think it was about the cult.
Yeah, it was about Charles Manson itself. So.
Yeah. And then there was like other cults that started following kind of like a similar thing. Mm-hmm. And
eventually the book Helter Skelter also got turned into a movie named Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which was just produced in 2019, so it wasn't that long ago.
Because we're still talking about it.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So why are we still talking about it, Hollie?
We are still talking about it because we can.
Because we can.
This is our podcast. We can't talk about it. No, because as like a cult, I feel like this plays into religion as itself. I feel like because of having this following, and especially listening to Manson and kind of like relating to like, oh, like having this higher power and higher being. That's just my take. But with the parole hearings of like Manson's followers, like the case still in the news. And Leslie Van Houten was just like
Van Houten
was just released in 2023, so that has become an update as one of the people that were main part of the killings and kind of like with the cult and everything with Manson.
Yeah.
And with the hearings keep coming up because I feel like it wasn't that long ago, like 1979, actually 1971, whatever.
Yeah, 1971.
When he was actually like and started being in jail. Like it's not that long ago. I don't even know how old Manson is right now, but
he
like
died. He died in 2018, I think, or something like that.
Well, that's probably also why they talked about him more, because then a year later, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood also got produced, and that was a big like media impact in that terms. And wanting to still keep with cults becoming such a thing, and I feel like there's also a demographic for cults. I feel like there's a lot of culty documentaries that are on Netflix.
There are. I saw one recently, and I was like looking through it. It was about like it was some cult. I don't know what it was about, but it was
something.
A cult.
But there's always new documentaries coming out. Like even like apparently a CIA MK Ultra, and like Manson that is coming out in 2025.
Yeah. So there's things still coming out, still being produced about this case.
And still relevant because even things are always still developing. And like now we have Leslie Van Houten.
Van Houten.
That has now been released. Well, that's not now in 2023, but like so that's not that far ago. Like that wasn't that long ago, and so now they can like speak from her perspective and see what happened all those years ago and have like this formal documentation of it, because where they weren't able to get it from Manson himself because he's in jail. He was in jail and then died. And then it kind of also parallels with today, in terms of, like, governments worldwide, like, are still accused of psychological manipulation in terms of that. I know. With psychological manipulation, and, like, just mass surveillance and, like, social engineering, and kind of, like, creating their people in, like, their country to follow their orders, and it feels very dictatory, to say the least, and, like, not letting people really have, like, a mind of their own, or because of being in the position of higher power. I feel like it's something, like, similar to the Romanovs, and, like, being in that position of higher power, people see them as this higher being, and, like, expects a lot out of them, out of, like, a regular person like me and you, that it just trying their best, really, and kind of, like, similar to what's happening in the US now, I feel like, because it's a lot of being changed, a lot of rights being taken away, and people being psychologically forced to act a certain way and be identified a certain way, and just so much going on. Like, people are having to change their licenses to fit a certain protocol and to not be arrested or being taken away, and, like, always having to carry around their green card to make sure they know that they're actually, like, supposed to be in America.
Yeah.
Which is crazy, especially, like, at Emerson. Like, a lot of my professors have talked about, like, oh, like, I've had to carry my green card more just in case anything would happen, that, like, they need to prove that they actually belong in the U.S., which is wild. And I feel like might be a little bit off the rails from the main, like, surveillance thing and, like, psychological thing, but it's forcing people to change who they are, and, like, to convert to something that the government is forcing them to be in some way. And that's how I see it, but hey. And then Manson's case isn't just, like, about past murders. It's also just, like, the psychological control and, like, mass influence that, like, the dark side of society kind of has. Am I talking for too long? I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
I'm sorry. We have 3 minutes left.
I was gonna say, I feel like he still talked about, because he, like, back in the day, he was the man who tore down the, like, happy-go-lucky 60s, even though 60s were filled with turmoil and change and protest and, like, civil rights movements and, you know, all of those movements that were happening. It was still a very, like, optimistic time, and people were looking to a brighter future, and they were, like, the flower children, and people just, like, you know, people just enjoying being people on Earth at the time. And Manson really tore that image down.
Yes.
And he exposed the dark side of our culture and just kind of society in general. And I feel like it's still kind of, like, something that haunts us today, because we can't look at society in the same kind of, like, lighthearted manner as people in the 60s did.
I feel like in some capacity we kind of wish we can go back to some of the lifestyle in the 60s, because that was just very free of nature. I feel like a lot more things got away with in terms of crime-wise, which was not the best, but I feel like that kind of freedom in some way, that people were able to be who they wanted to be.
Yeah.
And, like, maybe some people kind of, like, scolded them for it, but for the majority, that was just kind of, like, the normal.
Yeah.
And we're striving for that again right now, but right now we're being teared down currently.
I feel like people always, like, whenever people ask me what my favorite decade is to, like, time travel back to, I always say the 60s, and people always ask why, because it's filled with so much turmoil and the war and everything, and, like, all the stuff that I listed above. But I feel like it's the mindset of the people that is really, like, peculiar and free that I enjoy about the decade, because people were really optimistic. They were looking to the future. They were really fighting for what they believe in. And I feel like it hasn't really been the same since, even though, like, things have improved. Like, we have better civil rights. We have, you know, better women's rights. We have a lot of better things, but, well, in some capacities. But it's just, like, the mindset is not the same. It was forever left in the 60s. That's my opinion. I don't know. But we are
out of time.
Unfortunately.
It's okay. We'll be back next week.
Yeah. We are here every Tuesday at 10 p.m. So tune in for our next episode next Tuesday and follow us on our Instagram. Have a good night.
Pretty please with much sugar on top. At a.study.in.purple.
And follow us on YouTube.
Yeah, that's just a study in purple. You don't have to do the dots. It's okay.
Yeah.
And it's also on our Insta.
Yeah.
Whatever's easier for you. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys.
Sleep tight.
Bye.